Following video is designed to demonstrate the new ground extraction tools added in the new 4.4 beta version of n4ce. Essentially, the tool works by draping points over the underside of the model, and it's effectively trying to create like a rubber surface, a rubber mat that we can kind of push and pull to try and adhere to the underside of the point clouds. And obviously, I'll show you what control you have over that in the settings in a second. So to begin with, I'm just going to switch this over to rendering in height shaded mode, because then when the data gets moved into a different category or a different group, we'll see it happen live. So I'm going to go to Tools, I'm going to group by mesh. I need to add myself a group for the new data, so I'll call that one ground. And I'll say my target group is the new ground group. And we have some presets here sort of to get people going. They'll need to be tweaked probably from dataset to dataset, but I'm going to select the general ground for the moment. So as I said, we're basically trying to drape a rubber mat, or rather sit this surface onto a rubber mat, and we can adjust the characteristics of that mat to try and adhere to the point cloud more easily, or rather more accurately. The threshold here effectively is how strongly the point cloud pulls. If you imagine like a vac form, it's like how strong the suction is. Okay. The surface resolution, that's how dense the point, or rather that's how dense the mat is going to be. And grid spacing is what spacing to use to drape the mat over. And you can control the search radius, so when it interpolates the levels on this grid, it will use this spacing to find the lowest level within that search radius. As part of the process, it actually creates a surface, and just to trim the edge triangles, you have a setting here just to say maximum length of the edge triangle is whatever it needs to be. And the rigidness is the kind of the toughness of the rubber. So 1 is not so tough, 3 is pretty stiff. So you can go 1, 2, 3 and adjust the properties of the surface, and that coupled with the class threshold helps kind of the algorithm to adhere to the underside of the point cloud. Now to see what it's doing, we can sort of pause halfway and hit preview mesh. It's going to pause the process halfway so that we can kind of see what the mat, or rather the mesh, is going to look like before we then proceed to do any classifications. So to start the process off, I'm just going to hit preview mesh. As you can see now, it's extracting data from the ground model, and now it's creating the mesh behind the scenes, and eventually we'll see a blue surface appear under the point cloud. If I click show through cloud, you'll see that surface. Okay, so that's not intended to sit exactly on the surface, it's just the approximate surface as the software has been able to calculate it. If I untick that and control click and zoom in on the data, eventually you'll see the kind of the blue under the point cloud. Okay, so it looks like we've got a pretty good fit. Okay, obviously depending on what your point cloud data is doing, you need to adjust the settings, and we'll go through other cases in a second, but I'm reasonably happy with that. And we then have to say, right, how far from that surface should we basically now classify the new data to be, i.e. how close to that surface should the data be before it gets moved into a different classification. So 0.2 is probably a bit much, so I'm going to say 0.1. So we're going to go from any group into the ground group, which currently doesn't have any information in it, and I will press classify. Each point is now being tested based on its distance to the surface, and at the moment the distance is not vertical, so it's perpendicular to the surface, so you're getting a more accurate calculation. And if I now just untick the unclassified surface, or rather the unclassified group, and right click to get rid of the actual tool itself, there you go. That's essentially the surface that's been extracted by setting that search distance from the mat. It looks okay to me, so we could obviously carry on and model that if we needed to. I'm going to move on to the next point cloud. So now here we have a much larger data set. This is 1.45 billion points. I need to add a group, so let's call this one ground again, and in much the same as I did before, I'm going to go to point cloud tools. Okay, so we're going to go from any group to the ground group, and I'm going to select the general ground profile. Those settings should be okay, I think. 0.2 again is probably a bit too far, i.e. it'll classify too much data, like the footings or the first few inches or so of the houses, so I'm not going to do that just yet. And let's expand the unclassified and say height shaded, so we can see the data coming in. So I'm not going to preview the mesh this time, it'll just be done as part of the process. So if I do make a mistake, I'll basically have to remove this group, which will basically put all the data back into this group and then run the whole process again. So I'm just going to hit classify. Now I am running this on quite a high spec machine. Normally I run it on my daily driver, which is only an i7 from about 8 years ago, but I'm actually running this on an i9 with about 64 gig of RAM and a 2060 GPU, because this is actually quite CPU intensive. Okay, so if I was to click show through cloud now, it will show me that. Now there's quite a lot of noise under this surface, which I'll show you in a second, hence those little divots, but I'm just going to let it carry on for the time being. Okay, and we can start to see now the data being repurposed and reclassified as it's projected to that surface. Okay, so if I turn off the unclassified model now, and right click to get rid of the surface, there's that. Now if I zoom in and do that, you can see there actually is noise under the surface, hence we had those little divots, but as you can see the data looks quite reliable. There are a few places where I might want to tweak it, so I'm going to just turn on the unclassified and just hunt for a few places where maybe it's not done quite so well because of the noise under the surface. You can see here these bits, and that's because there's noise under the ground which is pulling it down. So all I'm going to do is going to go to group by polygon, say any, and I'm going to move from the original group, basically any group, into the ground group, and just do that. Okay, so it's quite simple and straightforward, just to tidy up any loose ends if you need to. Okay, and I'll move on to the next data set. Okay, so here's my next data set. This is a floor scan or a slab scan, and what we're trying to do really is give a grid of levels, or get data set down so that we can actually create a grid of levels quite easily. If I just put that back to use cloud, you can see there's the raw data, and there's quite a lot of noise in the way. There's quite a lot of objects in there. So what we'll do is we'll start the process then. So I'll say add group, and we'll call this one floor slab. Okay, so I can go to tools, group by mesh. Now then, I'm going to, so floor slab's the right slab, and we'll go general again, but this time I'm going to decrease the mesh to like 0.5 meter because there is quite a lot of noise in here, and say only go say 50 mil search radius. Let's put 0.5 in there, just loosen off the tension, shall we say, because there are in this surface ramps which we need to try and take account of. This won't be perfect, we'll have to do a little bit of manual tweaking afterwards, but it should get us somewhere quite quickly. So custom, because we're changing the settings, let's set that to only 50 mil from the surface, and classify. So there's the preview of the mesh. Okay, so if I now, instead of saying use cloud, if I say height shaded, okay, so anything green or blue is still in the other category. So what I'll do is I will now just cancel that tool, and as I said, I'm just going to tweak. So we'll say let's take this, And okay, so that's done a pretty decent job. There's another ramp here, I just need to tidy up. Okay, but I think on the whole, I'm pretty happy with that. Good. So again, turn off that. That gives us the unclassified, sorry, that gives us the floor model, which we can then obviously mesh and create grids from. And I'll now move on to the final model. Okay, so here we have some stockpiles, okay, but we also have quite a lot in the way of noise. We've got some vehicles in there, and there's some plant. So what we're trying to do is, first of all, we're actually going to use the ground extraction tool to actually try and highlight the noise, and we'll move the noise into its own group, and then we'll try and create the ground models after that. And what you need to remember is that when we're doing this, we're actually moving data into the new group. So what we actually need to do is we need to create a very accurate ground model as best we can, leaving behind the plant, so that we can essentially create ourselves a new group, which I'll just do now. Call this one spoil heaps, so that we'll move this data, the data we want to keep, into that new group. So group by mesh, and we shall say, right, so we're going to go noise removal. So there's a custom group called noise, and that's going to create a very tight grid. You can see quarter of a meter, quarter of a meter. Set that to 50 mil as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to preview the mesh this time. And with a grid this tight, it will take a little while. But here we go, it's finished now. So if I click on there, you can see there's the mesh sitting under there. Okay, so that's done a decent job, okay, of adhering to the underside of that mound as we wanted it to. If I look over here, okay, so again, it's done a reasonably good job, okay, and as we didn't want it to, the triangles aren't going up to the plant, okay. So what we can now do is we can actually say, well, by hitting classify, we're moving all the data that's within, shall we say, 100 mil of that surface into the new group. So we're moving it basically from the unclassified group into the spoil heaps group. So if I say unclassified, just so we can see it happening, height shaded, okay, but the spoil heaps is going to use the cloud. Hit classify. We should see most of the data come back with the correct color, and there we go. It's come back because it's essentially very close to that surface. There's a few places obviously where it hasn't, so I can help that out a little bit by increasing the search distance. So if I say 0.2 and hit classify, it's warning me that the target group has already got data in it. You sure you want to continue? I'm going to click yes, and there you go. So it's tidied up a bit more of the data, but the plant and the vehicles, they're still left behind, yeah, as we expected them to be. And I can now just turn them off, okay. And by right clicking, I'm also clearing the surface. Now that DTM, that blue surface, you can actually, if I turn the tool back on, when you preview it, you'll see in a second that you can actually preserve that surface. That's really just for record keeping if you need to. It's not an absolute perfect representation of the DTM. As I say, it's not going to be absolutely 100% accurate because it's being pulled and pushed into different places, but it's not the actual surface data. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create myself a new group, and I'm going to call this one base. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to try and create a base model so that I can essentially see the mounds, or rather extract the mounds out on their own. So I'm going to say target group now is base, original group any, but I don't have to worry about the unclassified data because that's in the group that's turned off. That won't be used. And we shall say rough ground. Okay, so now we're using a 3 meter grid. So what we're trying to do is we're actually trying to create an approximate surface of what's happening under the spoil heaps because we're not using too dense a point grid. And that should be good to go, I think. And I'm just going to hit classify. Right, so if I now say heaps height shaded, there you go. So you can see the spoil heaps are actually separate now because they're in a different group. If I turn off the base model, there you go, there they are on their own. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to continue this, and I'm actually going to try and calculate the volumes of some of these. Although we haven't actually perhaps gotten quite enough, there's a little bit of noise around here, so I'm actually going to do that again. I'm going to create a surface from the base. I'm going to turn off the spoil heaps, preview the mesh, and I'm going to up that to say 0.3. Should just tidy up the edges a bit. So now that's done. Turn off the base. That leaves me with the spoil heaps. And I'm now going to back to normal, and I'm going to model these. So to do that, we're going to go to point cloud IO, and let's say a 200mm grid, and we're going to interpolate the lowest level within 50mm. Align to spacing, so it's all basically aligned to 0, 0. Show through the cloud so we can see it, and we're going to remesh so that we basically fill in any holes. So if we did remove any data or too much data in some places from the classifications, those will be basically healed over. So preview. Okay, so there we have our new surface. So I'm going to hit create. Just going to call this spoil heaps. So that gives me this gridded surface. Okay, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to turn off contours for a second. And I'm just going to crop it down to the data that I need. So there's all sorts of mounts here, but I'm just going to say concentrate on these ones here. So I'm going to go to DTM, and to do this I'm actually using tools that are in Designer. So under points I'm going to go crop polygon, and just come around here, in there. Don't want that. There we go. And let's tidy up those points as well. So I'm just going to go delete. Okay, tidy that up. Cool, I'll do. So I need the boundaries of these if I'm going to do some volumes. So to do that I go to DTM, click on boundary. Okay, and I will put it in the banking layer for the time being, in green. Okay, so there we have essentially a Cadd polyline, and if I go to the Cadd backcloth, you'll see those. If I click on them, you'll see they have a height. Okay, because they're obviously at the height of the ground around the points, around the data, sorry. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on layers, and I'm going to select that layer banking. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. Because what I'm going to do now is, let's rename this to heaps. Going to go to the Cadd in there and do paste. Okay, so now I've got those in here. I can generate a model of the bases. So points, generate from lines. It will be B for the time being. And in element mode, so click that one. Let's turn off the text. That one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. Okay. Let's not worry about that one, it's a bit small. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. DTM, create normal. Okay, so I'm just going to turn off the markers, not worried about those. I'm going to now group them up. So go to status, I'm going to load, and here are some I made earlier. So group 1, we'll say inside feature. So I'll have that as group 1. Group 2, group 3, 4, and 5. I don't need to worry about. I don't need to delete the other triangles, but I will just for keep it nice and neat. So we're just going to go delete ungrouped. Okay. So I'll now turn off the line one. Let's not worry about that. Alt F8. Off. Okay. And the triangles and the contours. Don't need to worry about those. I need to label my groups. So 1 to 500 is probably a bit high. Let's go 1 to 200. And I'm going to go to groups. I'm going to go label. I've got a label style here. So we'll say that's round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4. Sorry, round 5 and round 4. If I want to see what it looks like in 3D, together with it, and now it should put. There you go. Okay, so you can see we've got the base under there, and we've got the point cloud as well. So let's remove the point cloud. So there you go. There's the DTM. If I go height shaded, and we can just also make that sort of say 40% transparent. Turn on some YF grid overlay. There you go. So you kind of get an idea. It's background color to maybe to white. Make it be easier to see. There you go. So we haven't really had to digitize anything manually. We've just essentially pulled out the spore heaps using the ground classification and put a base around each one. And now we can do a volume. So it's just as simple now as DTM, volumes by prisms, projected surface, plot the table. If I'm going to plot the table, I'm temporarily going to whack my size up for the scale because this table is created relative to the current scale. So like if I go back to prisms, projected surface, plot table, yep, and we'll select that surface, press OK. Not worried about the balance, not worried about the areas or the average heights. I'll just leave it like that. So that goes there, say. And now I can back my scale back down. If I want to bring the contours through, that's absolutely fine, I can do that. So I will go back to my other model, spore heaps. I shall turn my contours back on, turn the model off because don't worry about that, turn the Cadd off, not worried about that. So under settings, under contours, defaults, so let's change that to say a light grey. Okay, now you'll notice that this is obviously a little bit rough because the underlying data is quite rough. So I'm just going to make it look a bit neater by going to DTM, come down to smooth. And now that's given us much smoother contours. I go to contours, I'm going to go threads create. I'm not going to annotate them actually. Okay, right, they disappeared because my Cadd's turned off. Go to layer, turn off the banking layer. Okay, so there's my contours on their own. So I can now go back to the heat model. If I turn off my groups, there you go. There they are. That concludes this presentation.